On the bottom floor of this Toowoomba home, 8-year-old Elizabeth Struhs took her final breath. She died on a mattress while her parents, Kerry and Jason, slept upstairs. The pair facing the Supreme Court in Brisbane for the second day of a judge-only trial, alongside 12 others accused of causing the young girl's death.
Welcome or welcome back, and thanks for being here. I'm Cassie, and this is A Wicked World. The story I have for you today is about an 8-year-old little girl who was killed after her parents were sucked into an evil and dangerous religious group. This is the story of Elizabeth Struhs. Elizabeth Struhs was born in 2013 to her parents, Jason and Kerry Struhs. She was said to be a vibrant, bright, and happy child who wanted to be a doctor when she grew up. She loved roses and the colors pink and purple. Elizabeth also had 7 brothers and sisters. Her parents had met in 1993, then married 3 years later in 1996. The couple went on to have 8 children together and owned a home in Toowoomba, Queensland, Australia. Now, they weren't very religious at the beginning of their relationship, but that all changed around 2004 when Kerry met religious sect leader Brendan Stevens and his wife, Loretta, through their children's school. At the time, Brendan worked at the Revival Centres International in Brisbane, but he would soon leave that church. After that, he would go on to run his own religious group out of his home, which consisted of just a few families, and was called the Saints. The Saints held meetings 2 to 3 times every week and followed their own form of Christianity. They believed that every person was born a sinner and wouldn't be saved until they had received the Holy Spirit, were baptized, and spoke in tongues. The group did not celebrate Christmas or Easter. And their biggest, most dangerous key belief that they shared was the healing power of God, and therefore they did not permit the use of any medicine except for just basic first aid. In fact, they considered modern medicine to be witchcraft. So as Elizabeth's mother, Kerry, had grown closer to the Stevens family, she also began rejecting medical treatment of any sort. However, her husband, Jason, remained a staunch non-believer in the religion. And he insisted that their children at least be born in the hospital and be vaccinated. Soon, the couple's conflicting beliefs started causing tension in the household. And for a time, Jason moved to the garage to escape the tension. He was working the afternoon and night shift at a bakery at this time. And when the father wasn't working, he tried to fill his time with things such as golfing so he could avoid being home. Then, in July of 2019, 6-year-old Elizabeth suddenly fell extremely ill. She had very low energy, was looking increasingly fatigued, and was now consuming large quantities of liquid. She was also having bouts of incontinence at home and at school, which was very uncommon for her. Now, most parents would have sought medical attention at this point, but since her mother Kerry's religious beliefs prohibited her from doing so, nothing was done for the young girl. Kerry was completely convinced that God would heal her daughter. So the mother just began sending Elizabeth to school in diapers, praying, and consulting with her religious leader, Brendan Stevens. In the meantime, Elizabeth's condition only continued to get worse, and by July 15th, 2019, she was unsteady on her feet and continued to sleep and drink excessively. The next day, Elizabeth's father, Jason, who hadn't been home much due to work, noticed that his daughter had lost a significant amount of weight. At that time, he considered taking the girl to the hospital, but ultimately decided against it, fearing that his marriage could fall apart if he did. Elizabeth's mother's solution to the situation was to continue to text Brendan. Kerry texted him saying, "Jason nearly took Elizabeth to the hospital. He's torn. We're just declaring God. Exciting times." Brendan then responded back to her saying, "Fantastic news, Kerry. We are so excited for you and the power and love of our God. Amen." But the very next morning on July 17th, Jason would find their 6-year-old daughter unresponsive. So he wrapped her up in a blanket and rushed her to a nearby hospital. When they arrived, Elizabeth's condition was already so bad that doctors thought she was dead. She was very pale, thin, and limp. But Elizabeth was still alive, and she had slipped into a coma. According to doctors, she was just minutes away from death. One doctor said that she was the most seriously unwell child he had seen in his 20 years of practice. At the same time, Elizabeth's delusional mother Carrie, who was still at home, was texting Brendan saying, "Jason is taking her. I declare God to the last minute. She'll rise before he gets there. God can't fail." Brendan replied back, "God shall prevail. We are praying and singing praises to God for you. We shall see his glory, Carrie." Carrie texted again and said, "I imagine Elizabeth is sitting strongly in the car, with Jason shaking his head in disbelief." But back in reality, Elizabeth would spend over a week in the hospital recovering from what doctors discovered to be the onset of diabetic ketoacidosis. She was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And as she was recovering in the hospital, her mother Carrie refused to even visit her daughter or participate in any of her treatment. So instead, the girl's father was educated by a doctor on her diabetes. Jason was told that Elizabeth would need daily insulin injections for the rest of her life, or she could die. He was very much made aware that if his daughter's condition went untreated, it was fatal. The little girl's pediatrician additionally would tell Child Services after this incident that Elizabeth was not safe in her mother Carrie's custody at all. Following Elizabeth's hospitalization, both of her parents would be convicted of failing to provide her the necessities of life. Since Jason had been the one who ended up taking their daughter to the hospital, and he would testify against his wife Carrie, he was only given a sentence of 6 months suspended. Elizabeth's mother, however, was given an 18-month sentence, of which she would only serve 5 months. So for the short time that she was incarcerated, Jason was now the sole caregiver to Elizabeth and her siblings, meaning that he was now also responsible for taking Elizabeth to her doctor's appointments, which occurred every 3 months, and making sure that she got her daily injections of insulin. And the father seemed to be doing this each time without fail. Then in December of 2021, Elizabeth's mother Carrie was released from prison. And while she initially planned on leaving the girl's father, Jason, Carrie had recently discovered that he had finally joined her church. He had also become much calmer, and to her, he was basically like a new person, so she decided to stay. According to Jason, he had a mental breakdown after his wife had gone away to prison, and so he had sought out support from the sect members of the Saints. The church had welcomed him with open arms, too, as they saw the conversion of someone who once denied their teachings to be somewhat of a miracle and proof that God had cured Jason of his anger. And they knew that he was very vulnerable at the time, therefore an easier target. It was in August of 2021 that Jason had been baptized as a member of the Saints. Less than a month after Carrie's release, on January 2nd, 2022, newly converted Jason declared at a church meeting that God had healed his daughter Elizabeth of her diabetes. The previous night, she had a dose of insulin, and then the following morning, Elizabeth's glucose levels were still so normal that her father was convinced that God had intervened. As such, he told his daughter that this would be her last injection, and she could now put away her glucose meter, since she would no longer be needing it. But almost immediately after Jason made this announcement to church members, Elizabeth's health began declining. The group, however, was still holding on to their faith that God had indeed cured Elizabeth of her diabetes, and she would soon start improving. They then began taking turns over the next few days, monitoring her condition as she deteriorated. They sat by Elizabeth's bedside, praying, singing songs, and asking God to heal the little girl. The group's leader, Brendan, would tell her parents, "This is just a little trial to prove that you are all truly faithful to our faithful God." Even as the 8-year-old became weaker and weaker and continued to vomit, Brendan just reassured her family and the other church members that God would intervene and save her. But sometime during the night of January 6th, Elizabeth would stop breathing. Yet her parents and the rest of the members still gathered around her bed, singing choruses and praying for her to be raised from the dead by God. A text message that was later found between two members of the group would say, "Elizabeth does not appear to be breathing, apparently, but we will see a victory very soon. God can do anything." It wasn't until close to 36 hours later that the little girl's father finally decided to call emergency services. Jason told the others that they could not leave a corpse in the house, though God would still be raising her from the dead. One member of the church later said that the reason why emergency services had finally been called was so that more people would see Elizabeth's body and be amazed when she rose from the dead. When police arrived on the scene, they found about 20 people in the front yard, dancing, singing, and praying. One person was even playing the guitar. Inside the home, officers discovered 8-year-old Elizabeth lying on her back on a mattress on the floor, with her hands placed together on her chest. There were additionally handwritten posters hung around the residence that said, "She is only sleeping," and "God will heal Elizabeth no matter what."
No one said she's dead. It was more like she sleeps now because we believe that it is only sleep. And at some point, God will rise her again in this lifetime. Because that's a promise. And then he is coming back again.
So
no one actually officially said she's dead because...
Rightio.
When an autopsy was later done, the pathologist would find that the 8-year-old had lost 6 kilograms, or close to 13 pounds, since her last doctor's visit in November of 2021. Her cause of death was confirmed to have been from diabetic ketoacidosis, which resulted in both organ and brain damage. Elizabeth's father would speak with authorities, and he would tell them that nothing this time was going to make him bring his daughter to the hospital like last time, as it would destroy what he believed in. He had made the decision on January 1st that he could no longer be half and half about his religion, which was why he made the decision to stop giving Elizabeth her insulin. Jason also told an officer that while he wasn't jumping up and down for joy over his daughter's death, he was at peace. He said, "I don't feel sorry. I feel happy because now she's at peace and so am I. She's not dependent on me for her life now. I'm not trapped by diabetes as well," which is so fucking selfish.
I was here and we just prayed and wait for God to wake her up. And
So is there a reason why we weren't called yesterday?
we expected God to bring her back.
We're at peace with what was happening.
What did you think was happening?
Oh, she was going to get, God was going to save her, so it wasn't worrying us where she was going.
Yeah.
We knew God would save her, and we had to put our trust in him, and that's what she wanted, so...
I think an 8-year-old is capable of making that decision.
This one was. She was a very strong little lady, and this is what she wanted.
With the fact that she has passed on,
Yep.
do you have any regrets?
No, not one.
And
I'm at peace
talk me
of heart.
through that.
I'm happy for her. Because I've seen what she had to go through. And she hated it. And I don't care what anyone thinks, and it doesn't worry me. I did this for my baby girl.
Making him look like an even crappier father, if possible, Jason had been contacted and told that Elizabeth's body could now be released to the family for a funeral and burial. But he stated that he did not believe in funerals. He said that Elizabeth was with God now and he would not bury a bag of bones. Then come to find out, when Carrie had been released from prison just weeks prior to her daughter's death, she told her parole officer that she would indeed withhold Elizabeth's medical treatment from her again if given the choice. Right there, Child Services should have looked into the matter and taken her from her custody. Eventually, Jason, Carrie, and 12 other members of the Saints would be arrested and charged in connection with Elizabeth's death.
Just after 6 a.m, police swooped on a house in Toowoomba.
I have a warrant that's been issued under the Police Powers and Responsibilities Act
to search this dwelling.
Arresting 12 people, 5 men and 7 women, their ages ranging from 19 to 65 years.
Now placing under arrest for murder.
All the 12 persons arrested today were aware of the child's condition, were present during the course of those 6 days at the Rangeville address, and did not take any steps to provide medical assistance to the child.
This also included Elizabeth's older brother, 22-year-old Zachary Struhs. Jason Struhs and Brendan Stevens were the only ones who were charged with murder by reckless indifference. The other members of the group were charged with manslaughter.
Do you think that as a parent of Elizabeth, that it is a part of your responsibility to make a decision to keep her alive?
God is the one that brings life and death. So why should I get in his way of whatever happens there?
Despite the fact that Elizabeth had died due to her family not being able to seek medical help for her because of their religion, not a single member of the group could point to a line of scripture that specifically said that doctors or medicine was expressly forbidden. At the beginning of 2025, all 14 adults would go to trial. In court, the Crown prosecutor stated that Elizabeth's death had been 100% preventable, and she would not be rising from the dead. This prompted laughter from the defendants, because apparently they still thought that at this point she might possibly come back. Over the first few days of the trial, this would remain a trend for members of the Saints as they giggled, laughed, and scoffed as evidence was presented against them. Some even tried to make the argument that Elizabeth had just been sleeping. When invited to make an opening statement, the religious group's leader, Brendan Stevens, spoke for the group who was representing themselves. He told the court that he considered the trial to be a religious persecution. But if it wasn't already clear enough that this group of adults who had killed Elizabeth was a manipulative cult, multiple family members would also testify to this in court. Many of them recalled how their loved ones had been taken from them by the cult, and convinced that the group loved them more than their real family did. And when they pleaded with them to leave the cult, these family members would be cut off. Jade Struhs, Elizabeth's older sister, would speak in court, and she would say that she had fled her family and the Saints back in September of 2014, when they would not accept her sexuality. Jade said that she had been taught that it was not okay to be gay by the group's leader, and he had attempted to convince her to renounce her sexuality for hours upon hours. When the trial came to an end, Brendan Stevens and Elizabeth's father, Jason, would both be found guilty of manslaughter, even though they were both originally charged with murder by reckless indifference. The other 12 members of the Saints were also found guilty on their charges of manslaughter. At the sentencing hearing, the judge would speak, and she would say, "You have taken the life of a vibrant and happy child who should have gone on to enjoy a full life. Her death was and remains profoundly disturbing, if for no other reason than that it was entirely and easily preventable. Each of you engaged with some sort of spiritual gamble of the life of this child, a child you professed to love. The arrogance of your belief in that regard was and remains bewildering." Elizabeth's parents, Jason and Carrie Struhs, were sentenced to 14 years in jail. The cult leader, Brendan Stevens, received 9. And his wife, Loretta, was also given 9 years. Elizabeth's older brother, Zachary, would receive 6 years in jail, and the rest of the members received 7 years each.
It's been a long and hard 3 years. Not a moment has gone by that I haven't thought about my little sister, Elizabeth. I think the court made the right decision, and I'm relieved that those responsible were found guilty for their actions. I have to acknowledge the system failed to protect Elizabeth in the first place. We are only here today because more wasn't done sooner to protect her or remove her from an incredibly unsafe situation in her own home.
Well, thank you for listening to Elizabeth's story today. This case is incredibly frustrating. Not only were these church members denying this little girl her necessary medication, but when her life was clearly hanging by a thread, they still refused to admit that they were wrong and get her any sort of medical help. Instead, they prayed, sang, and chanted for the next 3 days as Elizabeth lay there, clearly at this point, beyond the point of help. It's so heartbreaking and scary to think that people can be so brainwashed that they won't even do anything to save their own child's life. So if you like true crime and you want to hear it from me, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button below and turn on your notifications too, so you'll know when I upload a new video, which is at least 3 times every single week. Thanks for watching A Wicked World today. Until next time, take care guys. Bye. Thank you to all the patrons of A Wicked World. Now, there's even more of A Wicked World on Patreon, so check it out on patreon.com/awickedworld. or use the Patreon app. You'll have access to exclusive videos each month and more. Any support truly helps to make sure the victims are never forgotten and to highlight the shortcomings of society associated with each case. Do you have a suggestion for a story you'd like to see me cover? If so, send me an email to awickedworldtruecrime@gmail.com.